Morning, everyone. Bon matin, tout le monde. Merci de nous joindre à nous pour cette annonce importante. Thank you for this important announcement. I will now pass the floor over to begin our event to the Honorable Marco Mendicino, Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Je passe la parole maintenant à M. Marco Mendicino, ministre de l'Immigration, des Réfugiés et de la Citoyenneté. À vous.
Good morning. At the outset, it's important to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional Indigenous territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Haudenosaunee. I would also like to note the presence of a number of special guests for today's announcement, two of whom are joining us virtually from Europe. Andrew Anderson, Executive Director of the Frontline Defenders, and Gerald Staberock, Chair of the Board of ProtectDefenders.eu. And of course, we're also very fortunate to have with us Rema Jamous, UNHCR Canada representative, Kimahli Powell from Rainbow Railroad, and Peter Showler from Penn Canada. We're grateful to all of you, not only for being present today, but for your unwavering advocacy and work in the advancement of human rights through refugee resettlement. Canada has a long and proud tradition of welcoming the world's most vulnerable, a tradition that this government has upheld and strengthened. Since forming government in 2015, we have more than doubled our annual refugee resettlement levels. We launched and successfully carried out numerous historic initiatives, including Operation Syrian Refugee, which resulted in over 70,000 being resettled here in Canada. And they're now contributing in communities across the country, including restaurant entrepreneur Rasoul Alabrak, who runs Damascus House in London, Ontario. I recently had the honor of meeting Rasoul and his family, and I highly recommend the mixed skewers, by the way. The government has also introduced and expanded pathways for Yazidis and survivors of Daesh, guardian angels, and many other vulnerable populations. In 2020, at the height of the pandemic, in a closed borders world, Canada still managed to welcome roughly a third of all refugees resettled around the world. And on World Refugee Day, just a few weeks ago, I announced 3 new measures to further build on this foundation. First, the Economic Mobility Pilot Project, which recognizes the talents and skills of refugees by welcoming them through economic immigration streams. The pilot project successfully partners with business leaders who sponsor refugees into targeted positions. And not only does this collaboration help make Canadian businesses more competitive, it also allows the sponsored refugees to hit the ground running. And that's why I was pleased to unveil the next phase of the EMPP, which will help resettle 500 refugees and their families under this pilot. Second, we said we would boost our world-renowned private sponsorship of refugees program by launching a call for proposals to improve support services provided by private sponsors and to ensure refugees take full advantage of the assistance that is offered to them. And third, we committed that Canada would nearly double the number of protected persons from 23,500 to 45,000 this year. And this means that more vulnerable persons can quickly become permanent residents, reunite with their families, and set down roots in their communities. When the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, says that Canada is a bright light, you know he means it. Cette lumière brille grâce à la générosité.
Canada is a very generous country, and Canadians have been very generous in welcoming refugees in their communities. That is who we are. That's the Canadian spirit. We are open, compassionate, and generous.
Efforts are making a difference. However, the work is not done. We live in an increasingly complex and uncertain world where human rights and democracy itself is under siege. When we think about resettlement, we envision those who've been involuntarily displaced from their homes due to war, conflict, and persecution. At the same time, we must not overlook those who bear witness to these human tragedies, who are active through demonstration and reporting, so the rest of us can be informed. But in doing so, they risk persecution, arrest, torture, and even death. As a result, increasingly journalists and human rights defenders are compelled to leave their countries as a means of escaping the threats that they face. In 2020, the number of journalists murdered for their reporting doubled. Pour ceux qui défendent les droits de la personne.
Those who defend human rights, including journalists, university, community, and humanitarian workers, risks to their safety is real.
Who put themselves at great risk in the name of democracy, accountability, freedom, and human rights. From authoritarian regimes to organized crime, the threats have never been more severe. That means those who stand up for human rights need our protection more than ever. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Today, we're announcing that Canada is creating a dedicated refugee stream to provide a safe haven for human rights defenders who have fled persecution in their home country. Aujourd'hui, je suis fier d'annoncer.
Today, I am proud to announce a new dedicated refugee stream to offer refugee status to those who have defended human rights and who are in danger in their countries.
World to offer a dedicated pathway to permanent residence for human rights defenders. By launching this new refugee stream, we're sending a clear message around the globe that in the face of growing dangers, Canada stands with the defenders of human rights. Through this initiative, we expect to resettle 250 government-assisted refugees per year, including their family members, and to provide them with the support they need to make Canada their new home. This will include a particular focus on persons who are at heightened risk, such as women and LGBTQ2 individuals. Now, we cannot do this work alone. We are going to get it done by partnering with those already doing incredible work on the ground, partners such as Protect Defenders and Frontline Defenders, as well as the United Nations Refugee Agency and other Canadian organizations. All of them are going to help us identify those human rights defenders who are in need of resettlement. And let me take a moment to acknowledge the multiple Canadian organizations that have been instrumental in putting this program together by providing their expert input, including Amnesty International, the Canadian Council of Refugees, the Canadian Journalists for Free Expressions, Kairos, Scholars at Risk, PEN Canada, and Rainbow Railroad. I'm pleased to have representatives from two of these organizations joining us today, Peter Showler from PEN Canada and Kimahli Powell from Rainbow Railroad. Both of them and their organizations exemplify the power of dedicated Canadians in supporting persecuted human rights defenders around the world, whether they're persecuted as LGBTQ2 activists or fighters, or those who are defending free expression. Comme nous le savons tous, la pandémie mondiale a touché.
We all know that all programs, including refugee resettlement programs, have been affected by the pandemic.
Which is why we will act with urgency to get these people to Canada. So, we also have the option to process some cases under the Urgent Protection Program, for which national interest exemption letters may be issued to exempt these cases from existing travel restrictions where necessary. We will work with our provincial and territorial partners, municipalities, settlement organizations, and partners like the human rights organizations that I have already mentioned to determine in which communities these individuals will settle. And let me address one last but very important point. To protect these individuals from the persecution that they have escaped, we will not disclose where these human rights defenders will settle. In closing, let me underline how proud I am of this initiative and all of the organizations who have supported us to get to this point. Elle démontre la compassion et l'expertise du Canada.
This shows Canada's expertise and compassion. We are helping human rights defenders and their families. We are offering them protection with a dedicated pathway to permanent residence in a country with an excellent track record in refugee resettlement.
Borders We need to look ahead and consider what we can do to better protect some of the world's most vulnerable people. This work has never been easy or simple, but it is necessary, and Canadians know and share in the responsibility to carry that work forward. Thank you. Merci. And I will now ask Rema to say a few words, followed by Andrew from Frontline Defenders, and then Gerald from ProtectDefenders.eu. Rema.
The UN Refugee Agency is proud to be working with IRCC, Frontline Defenders, and ProtectDefenders.eu in developing the important initiative announced by the Minister today. Since its creation 70 years ago, UNHCR has been providing protection and life-saving assistance to refugees around the world. Unfortunately, our work and that of our humanitarian partners is needed more than ever. Despite the COVID pandemic and repeated calls for a global ceasefire to halt the violence and persecution which drive refugee movements, today there are over 26 million refugees around the world. While this number may seem overwhelming and the situation hopeless, we must not forget that each and every person forcibly displaced from their home not only represents a story of loss and suffering, but also one of hope and resilience. Among them are refugees in desperate need of resettlement. They are survivors of torture, women and girls at risk of sexual violence, LGBTQI people persecuted simply for being themselves, or small children with medical needs that cannot be met where they are. They are also persons who have put their own lives on the line to advocate for fundamental freedoms. They are human rights defenders. The initiative announced today recognizes the critical role refugee resettlement to Canada can play for those in danger, for promoting the protection and realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Not only does resettlement save lives, but as the world faces steadily increasing numbers of forcibly displaced people, it is a tangible way for countries to show solidarity and share the responsibility of welcoming refugees. Unfortunately, there is a tremendous gap between the number of refugees who need resettlement and those lucky enough to be given this life-saving opportunity. Last year, resettlement levels were their lowest in 20 years because of COVID restrictions and a reduced number of places around the world. As UNHCR continues to advocate for more resettlement places, we also thank Canada for its leadership. Through the initiative announced today, Canada has increased critical resettlement opportunities and has also encouraged other states to do the same. Today's announcement continues the strong tradition of Canada's resettlement program and builds on a solid record of providing life-saving opportunities to refugees with unique protection needs. The UN Refugee Agency welcomes this initiative, which not only helps to advance the protection of human rights defenders globally, but also makes resettlement available for more refugees who need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rema. Merci. And now, Andrew.
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Minister Mendicino, for this initiative and also for the opportunity to work together with you to make this something that really delivers for human rights defenders and those in particular who are most at need. Frontline Defenders welcome the launch of a dedicated Canadian refugee stream for human rights defenders at risk, and we commend the Canadian government on its leadership in this area, and it really is leading. It's going way beyond what any other government is doing in terms of real support, and we hope not only that this initiative will be successful and provide much needed support to those human rights defenders who need it, but also be an example that other governments will follow in order to ensure a strengthened international protection for human rights defenders at risk. The human rights defenders we work with, the vast majority of them want to continue to work inside their countries. They're working day to day to try and make a difference on behalf of their communities. Just this week, I heard of 2 women human rights defenders who had been outside of Afghanistan who've gone back to Kabul because of the crisis in order to try and continue to support their colleagues amongst the women's rights defender community there in Afghanistan, where there's a huge crisis happening with killings and with the forced evacuation of people out of some of the parts of the country to Kabul and elsewhere. And it's exactly in that kind of extreme situation where people's lives are at risk that this initiative can make a real difference. The ability to provide safe resettlement for those who have the courage to stand up for human rights is not just about helping those people who are forced to flee, but it's about sending an important message that those who stand up for human rights, who are willing to take on the autocrats and the extremists to defend those who are most marginalised, they are recognised. We appreciate and support the contribution they are making to the advancement of human rights. And so I see this not only as a really practical measure that will help many people, but also something that sends a powerful signal that defence of human rights is something that needs stronger international support, and we need to work harder and work together. And we're very pleased to have the opportunity to work with Canada, with the UNHCR and with ProtectDefenders.eu on this initiative, but that we need to strengthen those who are working together in support of human rights defenders at risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And now I will turn over to Gerald.
Merci beaucoup et tout d'abord un grand
Thank you for this very important initiative to the Government of Canada and to Minister Mendicino. And now I will speak in English.
Is a coalition, a consortium of 12 organizations that work to deliver concrete protection to human rights for defenders in need, most at risk, in every corner of the world, no matter what issue on human rights they address. For us, this initiative that you're launching and the partnership that you're proposing to us is fundamentally important, both because it is an expression of your commitment to the protection of human rights defenders and to human rights, but also because this scheme will provide a very practical additional tool to protect human rights defenders when they're in dire need, when they can't return, when their life is threatened. And I think you said it before, and I think it's important to reiterate this. This is a unique scheme that recognizes the special needs and the special need for protection of human rights defenders in this context, and it will provide an important additional avenue of protection. When I look at the world today, I just have to go to Afghanistan. Andrew mentioned it. What is the situation of defenders in a place like this today? Think about Belarus, what is happening today with the detention searches of human rights defenders in the country. Go to a place closer to you, to Central America, the killings of human rights defenders, the detention of defenders in Colombia and Venezuela, or let's go to Africa, DRC, and many other countries. What we've seen over the world is that the right to defend has to be recognized as a right. It is normal to defend rights. People do this because they want to do this for their society. They may criticize their society or their governments, but they firmly believe in the future of their governments, and we have to do everything to support them and protect them, that they can do human rights work in their countries. But sadly, as I mentioned, with the countries I mentioned, and this is just a snapshot, I think collectively there's a documentation of over 300 human rights offenders killed every year. There's a documentation of some 400, 500 human rights offenders in detention every year. There are situations where people have to go outside their country because there's no alternative. And finding lasting solutions is often very difficult. And I think it is in those situations that this scheme will make a real life difference to human rights defenders. It is like a safety net, a safety option that is very, very important. Let's be clear, human rights defenders want a better country that they serve for. They want to stay. They want to continue working on human rights, like the example of the two women human rights defenders of Afghanistan that my colleague Andrew mentioned illustrate. But there are situations when they defend our rights, our values, that they also deserve our solidarity and protection. And this scheme is a real step forward for the protection of human rights defenders, and we applaud this leadership. We're looking forward to working through our network across the world on human rights defenders protection with you in making it a success. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous, Gerald.
Thank you, Gerald.
We'll now turn it back to Alex.
Thank you, Minister. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. We will now start the press conference portion of the event. On commencera maintenant la conférence de presse. We will, as all questions are from the phone, we will just start on the phone. On commencera maintenant au téléphone. Operatrice.
Thank you. Merci. Please press *1 on the device's keypad for a question. Faites étoile 1 sur votre appareil pour toute question. La première question, the first question is from David Thurton from CBC News. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Yes, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm just wondering, how could this program possibly help Afghan interpreters or people who've worked in Afghanistan with non-governmental organizations who, are fearful of their lives as the situation changes in that country? Minister, can you speak to that, please?
Well, thank you very much for the question, David. And as I said yesterday, the Canadian government is fully grasped with the severity of the situation in Afghanistan. We are very much looking at operational possibilities. My department is working very closely with the Department of National Defense, as well as Global Affairs, to see what is within the realm of the possible. We know that we have to take a very quick action, given that lives are hanging in the balance. We have teams that are presently on the ground in Afghanistan to ensure that whatever operation we put into motion will be informed by the state of security that is there. But the most important thing I want to convey with regards to this operation is that we know that Afghans put their own lives at risk by helping the Canadian effort in the war there, and we want to do right by them. And so we hope to have more to say about that in the very near future. The announcement today is very much unprecedented. As you heard, it's an opportunity for Canada to yet again demonstrate leadership when it comes to upholding human rights around the world by, for the first time, creating a dedicated stream that will provide a pathway to permanent residence for those who bear witness to human tragedies and crises around the world, who report on them, who are demonstrating so as to uphold human rights. And as you've heard both Gerald, Andrew, and Rema articulate, we need this kind of a stream, a pathway now more than ever, given that those who do report on these issues to keep all of us informed are coming increasingly under safety and threat. So I think in both cases, what you see is Canada demonstrating leadership, not only to try and contribute to peace and prosperity around the world by offering a pathway for those who in their countries are lending support to us, but equally by creating this unprecedented and historic dedicated stream today for human rights defenders.
Follow up, David?
Yes, I'll just follow up. So just coming back to this whole issue of how Canada is going to help Afghan interpreters and other people who've helped organizations associated with the coalition forces. You spoke about a corridor program on CBC's The Current yesterday. What criteria are you thinking about using for this program? If you can maybe speak about that, even if it's at a broad level. And you alluded to those who worked with the Canadian Armed Forces, but I'm also wondering about Canadian contractors, people who've worked with NGOs and even companies, like people who've worked with, the CBC or other news organizations. So, broadly speaking, can you talk about maybe the criteria you're going to use for that program? And, will it just be, Afghan interpreters, or is there a possibility, Minister, that you would broaden who you're considering would be eligible for the assistance that you say is coming?
The parameters of the program that we hope to announce in very short order to provide a corridor for those Afghanis that supported the Canadian effort during the war is very much ongoing work that my department is undertaking closely with my colleagues across government. We are going to put a considerable weight on the advice that we get from the Canadian Armed Forces as well as Global Affairs, who can help us define the universe of those individuals, those Afghans who provided essential support. But broadly speaking, the areas that we are focusing on are interpreters and translators, as well as locally engaged staff. Those are the Afghans that support our embassy presence in Afghanistan, as well as their families. So those are the three broad categories that we are focusing on for the moment. Obviously, when we have more to say about it, we will be sharing that news with you in a timely fashion. But we do know that there is tremendous urgency to the situation on the ground. I know that even in the last number of weeks that the situation has gotten worse, that lives are on the line. And I think everybody within government is doing everything in our power to try and put the final strokes to this plan so that we can put an option into action.
Thanks, David. On passant maintenant aux prochaines questions. We will now go to the next question. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Mira Robson from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Sorry, please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Possibly on mute.
Hello?
Please go ahead, Ms. Robson.
I'm speaking. Can someone tell me if they can hear me?
We can hear you now. Hi, Mia.
Okay, perfect. I don't know what was going on there. I wasn't on mute, so that was weird. Anyway, I'm just wondering if you could provide a bit more information about who will qualify for the stream you're talking about today, how they might identify themselves to the UN, how Canada might go about sort of reaching out to try and find some of these people, sort of what the process will be for under this program to identify the people who would qualify.
Well, it's a very good question, and that's one of the reasons why we have brought together a number of organizations to assist us with defining what constitutes a human rights defender for the purposes of allowing them a pathway to Canada. And so having Frontline Defenders as well as ProtectDefenders.eu as two essential partners who have an abundance of experience and knowledge in this space will play a very important and crucial role in identifying those individuals who have come under persecution for upholding human rights or for reporting. And certainly, as I mentioned in my remarks, we have seen an alarming trend that journalists in particular have come under serious threat where they face intimidation, harassment, torture, and even the potential of it's deeply disturbing. The point is that we are going to be partnering with our two organizations in helping to identify those individuals who would be able to avail themselves of this program. But in addition to that, we'll continue to work with the UN, and we have Rema, who is with us, as well as all of Canadian civil society who works in this space. And I just, in particular, want to again reiterate my thanks to all of the organizations who've given some input into this program, two of whom are on the line. We've got Penn Canada as well as Rainbow Railroad, with whom we've collaborated, but there are so many others. I listed some of them as well. So we will be working with all of them to identify the individuals who should be availing themselves. I don't know if Andrew or Gerald, you wish to add anything to that.
Yeah, I can come in and just say that as Frontline Defenders, we work day to day with human rights defenders around the world. We have staff based in all world regions whose job is to reach out and be in touch with those human rights defenders who are most at risk. We run training in security and protection. We have a security grants fund that dispersed more than 700 grants to human rights defenders last year in more than 100 countries, and we work together with our partners in ProtectDefenders.eu to support human rights defenders every day. And we've made the commitment as part of our discussions with the Canadian government and UNHCR that we'll take on verification of cases that come to us with regard to this programme. And we're a little bit worried at the potential workload that might entail, but we also think it's really important to try and make this work in a good way for those human rights defenders who are most at risk. And it's part of our normal work to deal with applications, to be able to identify who are human rights defenders that fit the UN's definition of who a human rights defender is, anybody who's working peacefully for the advancement of human rights. And we get fake applications, and we have to be able to have ways to reference people and to look at their background and what work they've done and who they've been working with to be able to be sure that they are people who fit within the criteria. And that's what we're committed to working together to try and deliver. It's certainly not going to be easy, but it's really important to try and do it in a good way to support those people who are most at need.
Thank you. I'm also curious then for my follow-up question, in terms of what David was asking about with the Afghan interpreters and others, my understanding is they would not necessarily qualify under this new program. This would be a completely separate stream, and also just when we might start seeing the first refugees under this stream arrive.
That's right. And certainly in the past, when we've created programs for Afghans who assisted Canada in the war effort there, we created dedicated public policies, whereas today the focus of creating this dedicated stream is to identify human rights defenders and journalists and others who have been persecuted or who face a grave risk as a result of their demonstration, the reporting of the public events, those tragedies and those crises. We are announcing the various partners that we are going to be getting down to work and cracking at it as quickly as possible, and we certainly hope to be able to start identifying successful individuals under this new dedicated stream very shortly, and certainly this year. So that is the urgency with which we will be acting in the implementation of this new program. We know that the situation around the world calls for urgent action, and we will be moving forward in that way.
Thanks, Nia. On passera maintenant aux prochaines questions. We'll now go to the next question. Operator,
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Anna Meller-Paverny from Reuters. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned the possibility of urgent resettlement within this new stream. I was just wondering if you had, people or a specific population in mind for urgent resettlement, and if that's something that's happening imminently, or if it's just sort of a hypothetical.
Thank you very much for the question, and you're quite right. We do leave open the possibility to use the Urgent Protection Program as a means of providing a safe haven for human rights defenders. We have, throughout the course of the pandemic, leveraged the Urgent Protection Program to keep corridors open for refugee resettlement. I mentioned that during 2020, when in Canada we were facing, the most intense period as a result of COVID-19, we found ways to work with the UN and other partners around the world to bring refugees who were in grave danger, who needed to find a safe harbor while the pandemic storm was raging around the world. And certainly going forward, even though we're in a better position right now in Canada as a result of accelerated vaccinations and a decrease in our national case count, we know that that is not true around the world. We know that there are still countries that are facing, a very different reality with regards to the pandemic, and the pandemic has exacerbated the danger and the risk that many human rights defenders confront. And so, with these two compounding factors, we will continue to use the Urgent Protection Program where necessary. And that program, as well as this new unprecedented program, a dedicated human rights defender stream towards permanent residency, truly a groundbreaking milestone for this kind of an initiative in the humanitarian space. This is in addition to the many other programs that we have in place, and that's why I think it was really important to put forward the entirety of the body of work that Canada contributes to upholding human rights defenders by offering established pathways for refugee resettlement, by offering protected status to those who are already landed here at an accelerated rate, by innovating new pathways. All of these things together demonstrates why it is, I think, that the UN has rightly identified Canada as a shining example of how we can advance human rights and democracy around the world.
Thank you. And where's Canada at right now in terms of trying to reach its goal of resettling 36,000 refugees this year?
Well, there's no doubt that the pandemic has continued to challenge us to have those corridors open. I've just mentioned to you that while here at home in Canada, we're in a position now where we can start to reopen the economy thanks to Canadians themselves who are taking up vaccinations at an accelerated rate. And without that collective effort, we would not be where we are right now. But the fact remains that around the world, and in particularly those areas where we see refugees making claims, along with our partners, that there's still many challenges, many disruptions. So I remain confident that we are going to be able to continue this work, but that's one of the reasons why on World Refugee Day, we pointed out that we were going to be redoubling our efforts to extending protected status to those individuals who are already landed in Canada, but whose final status is not yet determined. And by more than doubling that number, going from roughly 23,500 to over 40,000 this year alone, we are adapting to the situation, but also making sure that the refugees who are in Canada have that certainty. And by establishing that certainty, that will allow them to put their roots down in their community, sponsor their families, hopefully have them come here as well and start contributing and giving back. And that is certainly something that I have experienced throughout the pandemic. We've seen refugees contribute. I mentioned Razul, who I just met in London, Ontario. In a short period of time that he's landed, he's starting a business, he's employing people, he's feeding his community. It's wonderful to see. And I think that's why Canadians continue to support all of these initiatives. We're a leader in this area, and we take that with great pride.
Thanks, Anna. On passera maintenant aux prochaines questions. We will now go to the next question. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Kevin Gallagher from CTV National News. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hello, Minister and other guests. Thank you for taking our questions. I'd like some more clarity, though, on the this sort of fast-track program that's going to target human rights defenders. I'd like to get sort of maybe more clarity on what the definition is, how they'll be chosen, and who plays what role here, because it seems there's a lot of, as you point out, Minister, a partnership with NGOs, with the UN. So, who's identifying these people who need assistance, and what role is Canada playing in determining, who gets chosen, who gets selected in this process?
Thanks for the question, Kevin, and I think it's totally fair. And given that this is a new initiative, it does help to sort of spell out who is responsible for what. So, as government, we set the policy. We create the policy that defines, in broad terms, what the parameters are for it. And abroad, we have identified two partners, Frontline Defenders, as well as our other friends who are on the call. They will help to identify those human rights defenders that meet the conventional definitions that have been established by the UN and over time for referral to the United Nations. And the UNHCR is an essential partner in to whom we refer these individuals who do additional screening for us and identify them properly as status refugees, which then allows them to come to Canada. And once they're in Canada, we then look to a broad range of organizations, settlement and resettlement organizations, for example, Rainbow Railroad and Penn Canada, and many others from coast to coast to coast who aid those individuals under this program who will be eligible under it towards integration. And by that, I mean setting them up with the ability to acquire language skills or further education or job skills, or orienting them to the community in which they will be settling. So that's sort of a very broad outline of who will be playing what role in the implementation of this new dedicated stream.
Pardon me, sorry. I'll take my follow-up. Perhaps you also mentioned, Minister, that this is unprecedented. I'm wondering, though, maybe this is a question more for the UNHCR, but, you know, are there other countries that have this type of fast-track resettlement program for human rights defenders? You know, how many other countries is Canada with in this effort?
I appreciate the question, Kevin. And while it's entirely true that many countries are also very concerned about offering options and support for human rights defenders, what makes this program unique is that it really establishes a pathway towards permanent residency through a dedicated stream and a pathway. And that is in contrast to offering a temporary visa or temporary status that allows some who are reporting or others who have demonstrated to relocate to another country that may be willing to sponsor them for a temporary period of time. You know, we heard from, I believe it was Andrew, who said that in some cases we see journalists who are now returning to Afghanistan to report on efforts there. So what I think makes this program unique is that this is a dedicated stream that offers an immigration corridor towards permanent residency as opposed to temporary status. And I'm happy to turn it over to you, Rema, if you wish to add a little bit more context.
Certainly. Thank you, Minister. The human rights defenders profile is not an uncommon one amongst asylum seekers and refugee claimants around the world. So you will often find that this profile exists amongst people who are fleeing persecution and violence and seeking safety in various corners of the world. So UNHCR has for decades, 70 years actually, as of this year, processed and supported asylum claims or asylum seekers, rather, and refugees around the world, some of whom happen to be human rights defenders. At present, we have over nearly 24 countries that accept resettled refugees in the world. Canada is, of course, a leader amongst those nations, having accepted the highest number of refugees on resettlement for the last 2 years. But we do have protected persons who are also human rights defenders resettled in other parts of the world as well.
Thank you, Rema, and thank you, Kevin. Passons maintenant aux prochaines questions. We will now go to the next question. Operator, operateur.
Thank you. Merci. Next question is from David Aiken from Global News. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for taking our questions. Thank you very much for taking our questions. And Minister, just on a slightly different topic, and you may have addressed this before, but it's something we're interested in today, and that is the process and data around those already in the country applying for permanent residency on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. As you may know, there was some data presented to the House at the end of May, which took a look at the number of those applications received and processed. And for whatever reason, there seems to be a tremendously sharp spike in the number of rejections as a percentage of those applying for permanent residency on humane and compassionate grounds. Can you explain that data spike, why in the last year and a half, Canada has said no to so many people in this country who are already here working hard, migrant workers, healthcare workers, why they can't get permanent residency status on humane and compassionate grounds?
I can. Thanks very much for the question, David. And the first thing I want to say before I get right to the specific point of your question is that we've created unprecedented new pathways for many new vulnerable populations, as you've heard, not only in the context of refugee resettlement. I'll highlight again the Guardian Angel program, which allows asylum seekers without final status to remain in Canada towards permanent residency. I'll point out the essential workers pathway, which allows up to 90,000 individuals to settle in Canada permanently, including migrant workers in the agricultural sector. So we have innovated throughout the pandemic to, in recognition of the extraordinary contributions of immigrants right across the country. With regards to the humanitarian and compassionate ground pathway, this is really a last resort. That is to say, it's an opportunity for those individuals who have pursued every other option, whether it's through conventional express entry, economic pathways, family reunification, refugee pathways, etc., and all have failed, that it allows those individuals to then apply to stay in Canada for permanent residency status on the basis of humanitarian and compassionate grounds. So that's the first point I would make. The second point that I would make is that those decisions are undertaken by our delegated authorities within the department. And finally, you're right that certainly the numbers do reflect this year that there have been a higher degree of rejections recorded. But I would just simply stress that the reason those numbers are skewed in our view is that the pandemic has resulted in the delay of processing those applications which are very likely to be successful in their final determination because, for example, people have had trouble getting their biometrics and other supporting documents in order abroad, in large part because the offices have had to be closed as a result of the health protocols in place there. And those are decisions which are undertaken by sovereign countries, which, of course, we respect. So we don't want to prematurely rule out those cases. We certainly expect and anticipate that by offering them an extension and a delay to file that supporting documentation, which we require for the final determination of those humanitarian and compassionate cases, that the numbers will then come back up. It's just that in the meantime, those cases where there is not merit to grant H&C status, that they're being recorded more quickly.
Thanks for that. And I guess more broadly is, we have obviously thousands of people in the country who essentially have no status. So they're, undocumented, and they may be in the midst of an application, as you say, sort of the last hail on humane and compassionate grounds. And yet these are folks, if they get COVID, they're not going to go to a hospital, and they probably can't isolate because if they don't work, they don't eat. So it seems to me like that's a public health threat to me, the Canadian who's already here. Which sort of, that's just one example of why it seems to me we want to give these folks some kind of status, and I realize it may not fit into existing pigeonholes, but a lot of people say this is really this spike in numbers has highlighted the real need for some sort of reform that your government might wish to undertake or commit to make sure everybody's got some kind of status, so at the very least they can be safe, they won't be exploited in terms of their labor while they're here with no status. I'm wondering if you could speak to that broader problem.
David, I think you're right about all of that. And that's why, as I say, we've actually put into place groundbreaking new pathways precisely to reduce the systemic barriers that newcomers have confronted throughout the pandemic. And again, by offering a permanent residency pathway to asylum seekers who've not yet had their final determination before the Immigration and Refugee Tribunal, I do think does reflect the government's recognition that we should take into account what they have offered. I mean, the asylum seekers who went to work in our hospitals and our long-term care homes to provide health care and other support for Canadians who were impacted by the pandemic is, I think, one of the reasons why there was a groundswell of support for the Guardian Angels program. I would also point out that we have worked with both the private sector as well as labor leaders to create pilot projects that does confer a pathway for undocumented workers in the development sector. So we are indeed, I think, continuing to break new ground to create new pathways for those whose status is uncertain, and we will continue to push the envelope on that front. We also have to be sure that we preserve the integrity of our immigration system, and I think by and large, Canadians have confidence that our immigration system works. It works well because we provide pathways that really seek to align our economic needs with the skills and the talent and the experience that newcomers bring to our country. We look to do groundbreaking work in reuniting families, and we'll have some more to say about that in the very near future. We hope as well. And then we do this important work around creating pathways on the basis of humanitarian and compassionate grounds. And in each and every instance, we are looking to provide certainty and pathways and status for those who wish to come to Canada to contribute, and we will continue in that way.
Thanks, David. We will now go to our final question. On passe maintenant à notre question finale, operator.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine et dernière question est de Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada.
Last question, Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada. Go ahead. Question. Hello, Minister Mendicino. Could you speak to us in French about Afghan interpreters and staffers? And I'd like to hear you speak to the plan to facilitate their arrival in Canada. What sort of timeline have you set for the program? Will the settlement start this summer, in the next few weeks? What is your timeline? And who have you selected for this program? Answer, Minister Mendicino. Thank you for your question. First, we recognize that the situation in Afghanistan is critical. We know that we must act swiftly. We are currently studying all options. I'm working with my colleagues, Ministers Garneau and Sajjan. We're working together. We currently have a team on the ground in Afghanistan. The field team is assessing all risks and threats on the ground in order to ensure that we can ensure safety and protection to Afghanis who will be coming to Canada. There are 3 categories of individuals we are focusing on for the time being. First, interpreters. These interpreters supported Canadian forces. That is thus the first category. Second category, staffers. Staffers who supported our ambassador and embassy on the ground. And third, their family members. Those are the three categories. We will continue to work and make progress. As I said, we are fully aware that the situation is critical and we will have a lot more information in the short term. Follow-up question. Mr. Mendicino, do you have an approximate idea of how many individuals you've identified? One number we heard is about 100 individuals. Do you have an approximate idea of how many individuals we're dealing with here? Answer, Minister Mendicino. Well, Louis, I appreciate the question, but it is too soon to have an answer. We will continue to work with our colleagues at Global Affairs Canada and the Department of Defense in order to identify individuals we will be recognizing for their contributions and support, not only during the conflict, but also those who are still working with our staff on the ground. It is thus too soon to give an approximate number, but we hope to have an update soon, and very soon, because we know that it's important to act swiftly.
Merci beaucoup, Louis.
Thank you, Louis.
Maintenant, press conference. Merci beaucoup à tous. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your Friday.
Merci beaucoup, tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, in particular. Really appreciate this initiative. Thanks.
Thank you both. We look forward to working with you.